All right. You ready? You ready for this work of genius? Are you ready? This is the episode where it's it's supposed to set up the there's two episodes left after this, so they really got to get to a climax. There's only 8 total episodes in this season for this. Um and they don't give you any this show doesn't like to give you any information because they really don't. They know what they're doing, or that what they're not doing, I should say, I guess. So, but we do get finally a little bit of information, and it was really useful to really put some things into perspective. It's supposed to be the first big battle episode. What they choose to be the battle, first of all, of course, doesn't exist, but also it's the most lamest battle it could have been. Not because of how they even shot it, but just the idea of making that into a battle. What we learned in this episode, if it wasn't clear before, which really honestly it wasn't, they were keeping it vague. They were hinting at it. Yeah. We finally, like, the only things that they answer in this episode is what the hilt is about, where we are really, which is important. And honestly, and then they have a big reveal at the end that honestly I'm not against the reveal, and I did a little research on it too just to make sure, which when we get to it I'll explain. But the problem with the show is the timeline. So that even when they do something that is, let's say, you could say, okay, yeah, finally they hit something that I can believe happened. You know what I mean? That you're showing me something that I can believe happened in Middle Earth in this era, but they're always wrong with the timing. And even though you could take licenses as a creative licenses to make your story flow better, it just doesn't make sense. There was no reason for it. And that's why at the end I want to get to what I would have done with season 1, because there really was no need to do any of this meshing of timeline, different periods in the timeline meshed together. They've meshed 3 different periods. They've meshed at this point. First it was 2. Now on this episode, like, it's clearly 3. They've meshed the 1,000 years into the Second Age. Then they meshed 1,500 into the Second Age, and then they meshed 3,200. So pretty much the whole spectrum of the timeline has been meshed into one event, which is dumb on so many levels, because I don't know what they expect to do for future seasons if that's what they're already doing in this one. But then again, they've taken so many licenses. But what we do find out is that they are in Mordor. Where Arondir is technically is Mordor. And the problem there is that the whole time they were referring it as the Southlands. And it's not the Southlands. That's why it threw me off, because I'm like, the Southlands in Middle Earth is the region of Harad and the region of maybe Khand, and then to the east you have Rune. Harondor, Harad, that's what the south is, which is south of Mordor. Mordor was never considered part of the south in any sense of the words, but they've been referring to it as the Southlands because I get it. Technically, Tolkien did not give a name to Mordor prior to it becoming taken over by Sauron. So you could have licensure there, but it's not the Southlands. It's not the South. So that's why it was so confusing. But that's where we are. So at least we know where we are. And if we know where we are, we can understand the geography, because the geography is very importantly laid out. And this episode is called Udun. And Udun is an actual location in Mordor, in the northwestern portion, that becomes very important in Lord of the Rings. Yeah, it is to the east of Gondor. Technically, it's to the east of Gondor, but it's not the East Lands, because to the east of Mordor is the land of Rune, which is really the Eastern Lands. So you really can't do that. Mordor is still technically part of the Gondor region, I guess, that whole area. It's the equivalent of you saying that. Is the equivalent of you saying that that Bravos was part of Westeros. You know, you can. It's a completely different location. So it's like saying that, or saying that Dorne was part of Essos, and it's not. Dorne is part of Westeros. So you really can't do that. Adar addresses the orcs before he attacks. He's talking to them as if he's leading them. And honestly, it was lost on me until later in the episode, but that he's leading them to the promised land. He's like Moses. And the reality is that the orcs never had a homeland. They are not a united peoples. They are just scavengers, mercenaries. They are tribal, if anything. You know what I mean? So they would fight amongst each other because one guy takes over, kills the leader, and then he becomes the leader. I was actually thinking about it while watching this episode. The video game Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War that they had that they made is actually a much better, is actually much more faithful to the concept of Middle Earth than this show, because you do have orcs in the game, obviously, and you fight the orcs, and the orcs are tribal. There's tribal leaders, and they fight each other to get to the top. Yeah, the game actually gave you a much better and more faithful sense, and you go into Mordor in the game, and you get a nice feel for what it would be like to be in Mordor, because the game takes place in the Third Age, I want to say, but before the events of Lord of the Rings, before all that really starts to happen, and the main character is a Gondorian guard, and they give you a much better sense. And like I was saying, with the orcs, they do a really good job of showing how the orcs are tribal. They fight amongst themselves for position. So the whole concept of uniting them, like Adar is supposedly doing here, to lead them to a homeland, they don't have a homeland. They never wanted a homeland. They just follow where they can. They're like scavengers. If anything, they would be more like Vikings than anything. Like the old school Vikings, where they raid and they pillage, and then they go back to where they were. It's a fact that orcs lived in the Misty Mountains, underneath the Misty Mountains, which the Misty Mountains, yeah, are like the Huns, sure. Which the Misty Mountains are also where Khazad-dûm is, with the dwarves, and it's by a region. So they were always nearby, and they were all over the place, especially around mountains. The Misty Mountains are a fair distance west of Mordor. So this whole thing just doesn't track. Oh my god, my brain is exploding. Here we have yet again how they expropriate language from the lore and they redefine it into something completely different. And we don't really get to more of it until later in the episode, but he's calling himself an Uruk, and he's using the word Uruk to refer to himself as opposed to the other orcs, as if that's a race. The Uruk-hai are not a race. They are orcs that were, you could say, magically enhanced or genetically manipulated by Saruman in the Third Age in Orthanc. They did not exist prior to that. They were a new thing that Tolkien came up with as if to say, we need something a little. I need orcs that can be in the sunlight, because orcs could not be in the sunlight. So the Uruk-hai were designed by Saruman so they could withstand the sun, and so they're tougher. They're a bit more badass. They're like Viking marauders. They're like the Berserker Vikings, I guess you could say, of the team. That's what Uruk-hai are, and they don't exist prior to Saruman. Yet this guy in this show, Uruk means I belong to a race of elves who were the first orcs. They're getting ready for this invasion, this attack. And so they show up in there, and there's nobody inside, and suddenly Arondir shows up, and they're making it look like that tower is held together by ropes. If that tower was held together by ropes to begin with, then why didn't it collapse? I mean, just logistically speaking, it's hilarious. So he basically shoots an arrow into a rope, it burns in an instant, and the whole tower collapses. That's what he does. Then he throws a stone off the side, and a big wooden plank that's attached to the sword gets dragged to the doors and shuts them in, so that they're essentially trapped. And as the tower comes down on them, you know, they supposedly, most of them die. And then we cut to everybody else. He grabs an apple, he chews the apple, then he gives the same apple to the poor horse. Then he bites the apple again. Then he walks outside just to throw the apple into the ocean. Can you explain to me what that's all about? It's the dumbest thing I ever thought. But the whole excuse is so that he meets Galadriel, right? And Galadriel gives him a lesson. She gives him a lesson on humility. Watch.
Despise not the neighbor, but humbles the heart.
Wow. Isildur actually bothers me the most as a character. I don't understand him. They don't help me understand him. I don't know if he's upset because his mother died. I don't know if he's upset because he wants to be he's horny because he's a young adult and he doesn't know what to do with that energy. It's not clear. One second he seems like he is this wide-eyed guy that just wants to, go out into the world and be useful. And the next second he looks like he just doesn't know what to do with himself, and something is chewing away at him. But we don't have any context for it. We know Isildur is an important character in this entire age, and he's very significant because of his relationship to the ring much later on when he's an adult. That's cool. Elendil shows up suddenly, and this is really annoying because she asks Elendil, so what happened to your wife? His mom. And he doesn't answer her. He starts talking some nonsense about...
It is strange.
See?
We're sailing to the door, yet to leave.
He's like, she asked you about your wife and how she died. Don't you feel emotional about that? No, I'm just going to say she drowned.
She drowned.
That's it. And he walks away. I mean, it's not the actor's fault. It's just awful writing in any aspect of it. Because clearly what they are trying to suggest is that the death of the mother is what's causing the rift between father and son. And if the idea was, I don't want to tell you now because we want to tell you later, this wasn't the way to handle it, So terrible moment. We finally get a map here because this is the actual map.
Yeah.
At least they didn't make a fake map. And that's where we see, like, this is Mordor before it became Mordor. And if that's the case, again, this segment of the story should be taking place around 1,000 years into the Second Age, because that's when Sauron decides to go to Mordor and start constructing Barad-dûr, which is significant. Next to Mount Doom, which is called Orodruin. But we get a map, so now we know that the Southlands are not the Southlands. It's in fact Mordor. And she's asking Elendil, how long is it going to take? How do they know where to go is beyond me. We do know that obviously they're using Halbrand to figure this out. But how they knew exactly where to go, there was never any indication that Halbrand was from that village. And again, it was vague until now that what by Southlands they meant Mordor, but now we know, right? This is hilarious. Arondir is trying to break that hilt. Remember the hilt? With a hammer. And he just bangs away at it until that hammer breaks, and then he says, "Oh, I guess we can't break it." Wow. Wow. He didn't bother to like heat it up. He didn't bother to try to melt it. He just banged it with obviously a cheap hammer until the hammer broke, and then says, "Oh, it can't be broken. It's too powerful." Arondir decides, since he can't break it, as you can tell, he tried so hard to break it. He can't break it, so he's gonna hide it, and supposedly he's not gonna tell her even where he's gonna hide it. But we don't see where he hides it or anything. And they give a speech to the people, and they're gonna inspire them to fight, which is hilarious. These people obviously are villagers, but the speech is very cringe. Like, I guarantee you guys are going to live, which is like something you never say.
You shall see it rise again. Do you believe it? Do you believe it?
Do you remember what you told me when I was a kid? And of course, this show is just full of awful lines. I don't know where they grab them from. The language is very stale, but they're trying to sound like it was, like if it was like something smart that they would say in that era, and it just always comes across as just awful. He's like, "Tell me again what you told me when I was a little kid," and the line is just like, "Oh, go to the light, and the dark shadow will pass."
The shadow is but a small and passing thing.
This
There is light.
is supposed to move us. Arondir, we find out now that they have this tradition of the planting the seeds, and that's supposed to be hopeful. And he basically promises her that they are going to survive this and live as a happy family with Theo. Little elf-human interracial love. And I don't know, it's just everything about this show, it's just everything stale. There you go. There's the shot that you're supposed to feel for. It's just the tone of this is so dead. I just wanted to say, this show is full of fighting sequences for women, particularly Galadriel and Bronwyn, because we haven't seen Muriel fight yet. We just seen her be arrogant queen. And they're always just terribly fought out. You're gonna see some scenes here with Galadriel on a horse that you are just going to want to shoot yourself. And this entire battle sequence is just very poorly thought out. The anticipation is weak. We already know what's coming over the mountainside. There's no sense of suspense, really. There's no sense of geography either, of the strategy that they had put together. Look at this. She's awesome. At least this was, what? I have to say, at least this was better. She pushes the cart down. I don't even get this. I don't even understand what the point of the cart is. You see later on a shot where they're kind of fenced in. They kind of fenced in the orcs with fire. At least I like how he fights. It's believable. He kind of. But I will say that orcs are never a problem for elves. Elves are very fast. Orcs were never a problem for them. He should be able to single-handedly cut most of the orcs. The elves always had issues with bigger beings like Morgoth, Sauron, beings that were on a higher level. But this guy just basically throws him out, you know what I mean? And okay, he does a little martial arts, but Who's gonna be the Deus Ex Machina? Can you guess who's gonna be the Deus Ex Machina in this scene for him? Before he gets killed by the by this orc? They're just drawing this out extremely long. I guess they felt really proud of this orc and the blood falling on his face. Deus Ex Bronwyn, Deus Ex female power. They suddenly walk out from that little fight and everybody's like, oh, we won the battle. Now, here they have a little plot twist. So basically, we realize that these weren't orcs for the most part. They were mostly the people that betrayed them. Remember, that went over to the other side? So they basically killed their own friends. Plot twist. But it just gets dumber from there. Bronwyn gets hit. This old man. Suddenly we need to care about some old man. But it was only so that we could see that she got hit. So they carry her inside. She's bleeding because this arrow went through her arm. And the whole fact that this is the battle scene that they chose for this. This is supposed to be the battle scene for the episode. Maybe they'll do another one before the end. But like, this is the first major battle we have, and it takes place in a village. You know what I mean? It's not a major fort war or anything like that. There's nothing really involved in it. These people are not fighters. It's just villagers getting demolished by orcs. Deus Ex Machina moment. Ta-da! They're charging in. It just feels cheap. Even the poor horses with their armor look cheap. And it's very anticlimactic. So, and we don't know where they are. Like, whatever, only her horse is white. That's fine. Whatever. That's for effect. But didn't you just see that the sun was rising behind them? But we cut back to this and it's nighttime. The way negotiations happen in the show are completely nonsensical. Because you have, on one hand, they show that the bad guys have nothing to lose. They don't care. So you have nothing to negotiate with someone that has nothing to lose and doesn't care whether you give them something or not. You're damned either way. So if you're going to put your heroes, your protagonists, in a situation where they're probably not going to get out of it, you should have come up with something for them. And they don't. Basically, Adar just starts killing everybody. He just looks at him like, I can't do anything about it. And the boy, I guess, knows where he hit the hilt. So he's like, well, don't kill my mom, at least. And he gives him the hilt. No, he didn't even think about it. He didn't even think about the fact that Theo was obviously going to watch where he hit it. You know? So obviously the boy chooses to save his mom over the hilt, hands the hilt over. But don't worry, because, you know, Galadriel horse is on her way. And we have a little throwaway scene right here where Adar comes out and says, Waldreg, to this old man, I have something that I need for you to do. We don't know what it is. We have no context for it. But it is important. And just like everything else in this show, everything is poorly thought out. Like, the pieces to the puzzle, instead of feeling like they fit in perfectly once you see it all come together, they feel like they got added in after the fact in editing. Now, the Númenóreans shouldn't have any problem defeating the orcs, to be honest. These aren't even like trained orcs. They don't even look like they're a unit. So the fact that they come in with the horses is fine. But there's just a lot of weird things that happen in this fight that are obviously just meant to... They're narrative devices for the sake of being narrative devices. I don't understand the Númenórean motifs that they're trying to go for. So is it the sun? The other one she had, remember when she was in Númenor, it looked like leaves coming up. We have another Deus Ex Machina, because this is an episode of Deus Ex Machina. Guess who's gonna save Elendil? Elendil falls, right? How these orcs got on him, how they got that close, how he wasn't surrounded by his own guard, we don't have any reasons. We just needed to fall, right? Not to mention, if he fell off the horse like we just saw, I think he would be in some severe pain, but he just gets up like nothing. I don't even understand this shot. He's galloping over them to save his father, but it's not him. It's not him who saves the father. It's thank you, Halbrand. Damon's wife. A horse fell on her and she was paralyzed. This guy falls off a horse with other orcs around him, and he just gets up like nothing. So he basically tells her that Adar has the hilt. So here we go again. Another. Remember, I told you how every movie and every show is really just a chase scene. It's where, there you go. Like someone throws something at her, and she just instinctively knows to hop off her horse, hang on to the saddle. You like that?
Commands of the Northern armies.
Amazing. Remember, all this time Galadriel is like, I can't stop fighting. I'm gonna kill every last one of these mofos. She finally catches up to this guy, right? Halbrand shows up out of nowhere and helps her out. Makes him fall off the horse. Okay, fine. How is he coming from the opposite direction and knew where they were going? I mean, I don't know. But, okay, he does this whole thing to knock him off the horse. He falls off the horse. He tries to grab the hilt. And Halbrand obviously recognizes him. But he doesn't recognize Halbrand. And Galadriel tells him, no, don't kill him. Like, what? How do you just switch the motivation of the character to a complete 180? Oh, because we need him. Okay, you want to talk to him before you kill him is one thing, but we don't need him. We need the hilt. Now, it's daytime. We cut back. The battle is over. The battle is over, and these orcs are being held under a tent as captives. Now, let me tell you something. The Numenor, nobody would take orcs as captives, ever. There's absolutely no value, and you can't trust them. There's no value to keeping them alive. They're not going to be good slaves. They're not going to be your servants. They're not going to be good people. They're just going to wait to backstab you. You would have killed them all. Galadriel has ordered a company to, I don't even remember what he ordered for what? To track down the orcs that escaped, right? When did she do that? She's still with Halbrand and Adar. When did she come back to do that? It's completely out of time. This scene should have come later. But the whole point is like Isildur, remember, mind you, all he did was charge into the battle and saw his dad fall and grab his dad. We didn't see Isildur kill anybody, fight anybody of any sort, but he's acting like, wow, like I'm so excited that I did this. I want more action. Orcs are elves. So if anything, you would feel pity for them, that's what happens to you when Morgoth gets a hold of you, you know what I mean? You wouldn't treat them like they're a completely different species. They're technically your species that were corrupted and degraded into this. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the hilly churls. Like once you find out what the hilly churls were, remember, you kind of start feeling bad for the hilly churls because you realize they are Canrians that are captive in this state. You know what I mean? And that's the same thing with orcs. They're elves that are captive in this state. She's got nothing on this guy. If you want to have an interrogation scene where she's going to convince him to give her information, give her something on him. It's like the Batman and the Joker, like in The Dark Knight, where he just laughed at Batman because he's like, you've got nothing on me. You've got nothing. You can beat me up. You can do whatever you want, and you can't convince me to tell you anything. You don't know how to use leverage against me to tell you what I want. But because it's Galadriel horse, you know, she's going to hear what she wants to hear. She's like, I'm going to kill every single orc, and I'm going to keep you alive to watch, so you can see it happen. And then he's like, you know what? You're worse than You're basically the same thing as Sauron. And like, he's right. Right? He's totally right to say that to her. And now that pisses her off so much that he basically called her as dark as Sauron, that now she decides in a moment, before she told Halbrand, oh no, I need him, don't kill him. But no, now that he insulted me and I'm upset, now she's gonna move to kill him. And it's Halbrand, for some dumb reason, Halbrand tells her, hey, Galadriel, now, don't do it. And it's like, why though? Why any of this? You know? Why any of it? But that's where we're at. And we are in some kind of a barn. I guess he's shackled to this piece of wood, and they just leave him there? They don't even put a guard to watch over him? No, he's just there. They just leave him there. They feel perfectly confident that he can't run away from here.
Perhaps I should begin by killing you. You slavering.
You told me not to kill him, but so you don't get to kill him. I wanted to kill him, and you didn't let me kill him. Now you don't get to kill him. It's supposed to have the subtext clearly that there's something between them. We have had no motivation for Halbrand since he just gave up and decided to do whatever she tells him to do. Well, they fought a bunch of dumbass orcs. People died. So if anything, they should be burying the dead and counting their lucky stars and figuring out where to go next, because clearly they're not going to be safe there. This isn't the end of it. But no, here they are celebrating. And this guy introduces Bronwyn to Muriel as if she's the mayor of the town. They bring Halbrand in just basically to be like, oh, look, we brought you a king. And she's like, you're really the king that was promised to us? And he's looks like everybody wants me to be, so I am. The show creators had opportunities here. We don't know anything about the South or the East. Tolkien really didn't delve into that. They could have made up whatever they wanted about the Southlands and about the Eastlands, but this isn't the South. They could have given backstory to him. They could have created an entire history. They could have made it all up. There's so much leeway when it comes to that area of Middle Earth. But instead, we settle for this. It's just a made-up character. He doesn't really have much of a background. There isn't a history behind it. You know what I mean? Like when we go to House of the Dragon, we know there was Valyria. We know there's different houses. We know what parts of the Westeros they're from. There's history behind each character, right? It's all very well thought out. You know what I mean? And they have plenty of time to do that here, and they could have done that here. This is the one area where you could have played with it because Tolkien didn't really write anything into it. And that's a missed opportunity because we don't really get any of that. What other lords there may be in the South that he can ally with? But we're not going to get that. I'm also annoyed at Theo because he has no guiding arc in this entire show. You know, it's unclear if he's unhappy because he doesn't have a father figure, because he wants to prove himself. It's all over the place with the young adults in the show. There's no clear indication of what motivates them, what they care about, what they're suffering internally. And so it makes it for a very ambiguous characters that you just don't know what they're going to do. Which I guess that's what they want it to be. But at the same time, there should be something motivating it. It shouldn't just be like, well, I'm just going to do this because I'm 15 years old, you know? Because Arondir hands it over to him and says, well, now you can do the right thing and get rid of this. And when he opens it up, you're like, I thought that was a dumb move because this kid is just going to use the hilt, right? Because he basically says, I miss the power that I felt having the hilt. So already you're like, okay, this kid is not the right person to be the caretaker of the hilt, you know? He doesn't know how to wield it. He's probably going to become worse than an orc if you give it to him, but he gave it to him. And here we have the second plot twist. Adar fooled them. So why didn't you guys think of this? Why didn't you guys think of making a decoy? Just like Adar made a decoy for you guys. So clearly, remember when he told, when Adar told Waldrag, I need you to do something? Well, now we're going to see what he's going to do. Now we're going to see why the hilt is the key, which doesn't really make sense. But it is interesting in the sense that what it's going to cause, this particular event that's about to happen now, irrespective of who's there, should have happened hundreds of years earlier. So the hilt is a key, right? We said it's a key. Basically, he puts it in there, he twists it, and what it does, apparently, it's like unlocking a dam, so that the water from, I guess, the lake above empties out. Now, I don't understand one thing about this, is that you would think, oh my God, everyone's gonna drown, right? No, everyone doesn't drown. Apparently the water goes underground, and you're like, why does the water go underground? The water goes underground because, remember, they were building trenches? As if that makes any sense. Remember, they were building trenches? I guess the trenches were built in mind to direct this water, this flash flood, if you want to call it, direct the water underground to what you'll see but it doesn't make any sense. That amount of water coming from that dam that was holding it by the lake would have flooded the valley. It wouldn't just go underground unless you literally built a huge ass chasm. Isildur, again, like Theo, we don't understand this kid. All of a sudden he's defensive. He's like, how did you know how to talk to the horse and calm it down? And he's like, the horse knows its owner, and it's your horse, and it knows your heart is troubled. And he's like, what do you mean? How do you know that? How did you learn that? And he's like, as if on cue, he's like, because of your mom. Your mom taught me that. They hug it out. And it gets interrupted by the fact that the water apparently is underground and is coming up in geysers all of a sudden everywhere. These characters make no sense, right? They all seem like they're all schizophrenic. One moment they say one thing, and then the next moment they completely contradict themselves or go against what they just said. Galadriel says, don't kill Adar. Then she's like, I'm going to kill you, you bastard. Then Halbrand's like, don't kill him. Then this guy is like, I don't want to talk to you, Dad. And he's like, how do you know how to talk to horses, Dad? Who taught you? Mom? Oh, now that we're talking about Mom, she drowned. So it's very confusing that these characters just don't really have a sensible story arc that's consistent. Like I was telling you with Zhongli, where his whole thing is to honor and obey contracts. So even if people are putting pressure on him to break a contract because emotions, he's like, no. And if you do break a contract, there's repercussions. And he sticks to that, and it's consistent with his character and his motivation. And it's a freaking video game, right? And they can't even do that for this, where this is all character based. In any case, here we have some more. One thing that is a real pet peeve of mine in the show is how these writers of the show want to transform the names of places and turn it into a chant. Remember, the dwarves were like, Khazad-dûm. That would never happen. That's just ridiculous. And now the orcs are chanting Udun. Oh, let me show you this. So, like I was saying before, the water, right, is going through the trenches. Magically, these guys built the trenches to go into this shot reveal. That's Mount Doom. That's significant because that's where Sauron is going to build his tower next to Mount Doom. And that's where, you know, the ring is going to be thrown in Lord of the Rings. So this is, an important geographical location. Here we are seeing it as a mountain, all green, before it turned dark, before it erupted. And the insinuation here is that this water, I mean, just think about how ridiculous, how contrived it is. So you mean to tell me that these people, Morgoth and Sauron and his captains, were like, if I ever die or I ever lose this battle, I want you to build a trench that goes from the lake in Udun all the way to Mount Doom, so that the water can go into the volcano, mixed with the magma, which is what happens here, and cause it to erupt. Because that's important, and that's going to help transform Mordor into a land of magma and just fire. Which is inconsistent with volcanoes, because if you know anything about volcanoes, at least as far as a volcano, when it erupts, yeah, it does obviously cause damage. It burns everything up, but it also is necessary for life. I mean, Hawaii is a bunch of volcanoes, and it's so rich in life because it has volcanoes. It's not a sign of death, it's a sign of life through fire and the inner earth coming out and bringing all of that rich soil and minerals into the surface so that plants can thrive. But here it's used as this volcano is active and it's just going to keep erupting and turn the land to ash. Which, fine, I'll give them that. I'll give them this. So yeah, this happens. But the fact that the trenches were going to be enough to conduct water where they wanted it to go so intricately is ridiculous, and that they had this plotted and thought of this for so long as well seems ridiculous, especially since it feels like that. I don't know, we don't know when that dam was built, how long that dam was built. I don't know. You would assume that the elves built it, but when they built it, we don't know. In any case, everybody freaks out because here we have this explosion. Wow, big money shot scene. It's just crashing. And I love in this, as everything's falling apart, I don't know if I skipped it already, but remember they left Adar in the barn. Adar somehow got away. Of course, he didn't have anybody watching him, but how he got out of the shackles, we don't know, but he did. So he survived, so he's not even dead. And Galadriel just stays there. She's just like paralyzed. She finally, I think it's both awful and good in a sense. It looks awful because it doesn't really carry any weight. But it is funny that Galadriel, after all this time where she just seemed to always know what to do, she's finally like, she should feel overwhelmed. It should look like she's overwhelmed. But instead it just looks like she's just like, you think she'd feel like a failure. This is a scene where any normal human being would feel like a failure. Like, every time that I lead people to do something, it just gets worse. It just gets worse every time. And that's what her face should be conveying here. But she's incapable. She just stays there and she lets the volcano take over, and that's the cliffhanger. I don't have anything against the fact that this is how Mount Doom erupts, even though it's contrived. That this is the cliffhanger, but Sauron, why is she there? She stays there because she's supposed to be in shock, but she doesn't convey the shock. She just looks like she's tired and bored of herself. Right, yeah, we know she's not gonna die, even though she's clearly engulfed by a freaking volcano ash cloud. What they have shown us of Galadriel Horse is how she continuously fails as a leader. She leads people to death. And you would think that it would sink in this moment. I have led these people to do fight. I thought I was doing the right thing. And while I was doing the right thing, I totally missed what was really happening. Like, she didn't even know that the hilt wasn't the hilt. Nobody bothered to check the hilt. I like the concept that this is how Mordor transitions from a land of greenery to a land covered in ash because the volcano erupts. It is true that the water could cause that reaction to the volcano, because I was wondering if that was even just made up, or if that was something that could really be a thing. And I guess it can be a thing. But the fact that they could, again, build a trench that would lead the water straight into the heart of the volcano, that was their plot all along, that this is something that they had thought of long time ago, that all it took was that hilt going inside of that thing and it turned like a key and it made the water in the dam just flow, so that it almost feels like it was always designed that way. Seems ridiculous. The Mordor plot is that Sauron goes there because of Mount Doom. He's connected to the energy of Mount Doom because he forges the ring using the energy of Mount Doom, which is why in Lord of the Rings, the ring has to be thrown in there. But all of this, if this was a scene, Sauron should be there again, and it should have happened in the year 1000 of the Second Age. The rings were forged in the year 1500, and Miriel existed in the year 3200. So, I mean, now we have 3 different time periods that are meshed together on this show. It's ridiculous. You can't discuss it. I want to get into what they should have done, right? What they could have done with the season. There's only 3 main events in the Second Age. They could have made the first season about the forging of the rings, and I'll get into that. They could have made the second season about the capturing of Sauron, the Númenóreans, Minas Tirith, and it wasn't Pharazôn, it was Minas Tirith, so a king that was several kings before Pharazôn and Miriel, fighting Sauron, taking him captive, bringing him to Mordor, and causing the rift in bringing him to Númenor, and causing the rift in Númenor that leads to the tragedy of the fall of Númenor, which is Atlantis. And the third season could have been about leading up to the last alliance of elves and men, and how that one ring gets taken away from Sauron finally, right? So let's go back to that's how 3 seasons. That's the most you could have done with the content. And there's a lot of things that you could have added. Like I said, we could have created an entire legacy for the Southlands. The actual Southland, which is Harad, not Mordor, and Rhûn in the east. The peoples that we already know that existed in the lands that are going to be the lands of the Eldred later on. And the people that end up having the rings, because when the rings get forged, we are going to have 7 rings for the dwarves, 9 rings for men, and 3 rings for the elves, and the 1 ring for Sauron. So we know that there's 7 houses of dwarves, so obviously each house gets 1. That's a whole plot point in itself. Like, you have 7 story arcs. Who are the 7 dwarves that get the rings? We know Durin's line is gonna get a ring, because that was a very importantly delineated in the appendices of the Third Age, because we need to know what happens to that. because they come into play obviously in a very major way. And the history of Durin's line leading up to Lord of the Rings is important because of that. And then we could have also made up who are the 9 men that get the rings of Nazgul. I remember seeing a video that a YouTuber had done like long before this show was even dreamed of being coming into play, where he was like, what if Sauron gave one of the rings of men to a warrior mercenary from the east, you know? And I thought it was a pretty interesting story that they came up with, but it's not real, it's not canon. But you can do that because we don't really know who the Nazgul are. The only Nazgul that we get some sense of is the Witch King of Angmar, and you can't even really talk about that now because Angmar happens in the Third Age. So we do know that in the Second Age, the Nazgul appear. So you could have put that in the second season of the show. But let's go back to the first season. The first season could have been all about the forging of the rings. And there's plenty that happens in and around that, because you could have made him the protagonist. You could have made it about how it's about a man that is dejected after the War of the First Age. He was given promises by Morgoth that he would be something, that his efforts and his abilities were going to lead to greatness, and all of that gets shot to the dark. He loses everything. You would see it from his eyes. And at this point in time, Sauron has all of his energies and his powers, so he can look as beautiful as he wants to be. He could have been a very charismatic, gorgeous looking guy that just is able to convince. He could have been like a Cheeto from Gomorrah. He could have been like Cheeto Di Marzo. So it could have been a story arc about Sauron wanting to redeem himself and seeing that he's lost everything and that no one gives a crap about him. You know, no one's given him an opportunity at redemption. He's like, well, then I'm going to take over. I'll finish what he started. And then he gets in touch with the orcs again. And then he goes to form Barad-dûr and Mount Doom, which is what we saw right now. You know what I mean? And then he befriends the elves by convincing them that they need to make the rings so that they can prevent the decay of Middle-earth. You know what I mean? Because that then ends with the whole Siege of Eregion, the battle in Eregion, which you could have had Galadriel there and Elrond there. You could have involved Gil-galad, and it also involves the Númenóreans. They end up coming to save the elves from Sauron, because Sauron almost defeats them. Elrond has to retreat to what becomes Rivendell, and Galadriel retreats to what becomes Lothlorien. There's enough there for one season, and it's within the lore, and it's interesting, and you have a really interesting Sauron character, you know, who is almost like the protagonist in a sense. If you wanted to show how evil, remember they said in the beginning of this, evil doesn't always start as evil in the beginning. Okay, show us that. But no, they want to pretend, they want to do like this is the Third Man. The Third Man is a very old movie from like the 40s or 50s. I want to say the 40s, with Orson Welles, where the whole gimmick of the Third Man, when you learn about it in film school, is that you don't see everybody talks about this guy, right? Everybody's talking throughout the movie, everybody's talking about this guy. You never see him. So that when you finally see him, you're like, oh, this is the guy everybody's been talking about. Like, that's what they want to do with Sauron here. Like, everybody's talking about Sauron, but we don't know who he is. So that when we finally realize who he is, everyone's going to be like, oh my God, reveal! And it's like, that's lame, though. That's lame. Because there's so much more you can do with that character, given with what the material that actually is there. So that's what I would have done with the first season. I would have made it about the forging of the rings, and you really need Sauron to drive. The Second Age really is about Sauron, and you have to drive it through him. You can't ignore him and pretend that he's a mystery character that at some point on the show, maybe that... at this point, I don't even think they're going to show him in this season. If they do reveal him in this season, I think they're going to wait till the last episode. because I think they think they're that cool with it. Like I think that's their, like I'm telling you, they're going for the third man approach, where it's like we're not gonna see him, we're gonna have everybody talk about him, so that everybody and all the fans are gonna be talking about, you know, when is he coming? Who could it be? Is it Halbrand? I mean, if it's Halbrand, that's inconsistent and dumb. You know, they should have made it about him the whole way through. There's no need to jump around. There's no need to coalesce, force different time periods together that don't go like we have now. Because I mean, I don't know how they're gonna milk this for 3 or more seasons, when you already took the rings being forged, the Pharazôn plot line, which is the destruction of Numenor, and the forming of Barad-dûr Mordor in one season, when you could have milked that for 2 into 3. These are the things that are important. We need to have strong female characters. We need to show that these characters are living in a world of men and doing their own thing and taking charge and being impulsive, and they just missed the boat because it feels like these people are just working out their own personal traumas and their own personal relationships through these characters, rather than giving us characters that are true to the lore, and that could have been really interesting for an age, the second age being an age that doesn't have a lot of material to begin with, and is mostly a setup for the third age and the Lord of the Rings. There's still enough that if you are creative and you are a good writer, you could have come up with a lot of your own stuff while sticking to the main gist of the lore. And when you think about it, I mean, now that I've had to contemplate it and go through it, watching this, it's like, it's all about Sauron, really. You know what I mean? Everything that's major that happens in the second age involves Sauron in some way, and is setting it up for what we have in Lord of the Rings. You know, the forging of the rings, the building of Barad-dûr and creating Mordor as his stronghold, the fight of the destruction of Eregion, the shutting down of Khazad-dûm, the forming of Imladris, Rivendell, which becomes Elrond's stronghold, Galadriel going to Lothlorien, becoming her stronghold, the rings being handed out to the dwarves and men, which then leads to the formation of the Nazgul, which is very important. How the rings affect the dwarves, because the funny thing about the rings is that they're powerful and they grant you certain powers. For the dwarves, it granted them the ability to find jewels and minerals on the ground. So they would find it, but then it would be cursed. So they would end up losing it, or they would end up having to fight terrible wars to defend it against orcs or against balrogs or against, you know, any other kinds of evil creatures. So it's like the rings are cursed. They grant you powers, but then they're cursed. You could play off of that with the characters. You could have made the second season about that, you know. The rings get handed out. Who are the 9 men, and how do they become Nazgul? You don't even have to do all the 9 men but do some of them. And then obviously Tar Minastir, Sauron, who got defeated in the first battle, right? Like, again, going back to when Eregion got attacked, it was the Numenorians that sailed to help Elrond and Galadriel and the elves defeat Sauron. Yeah. And then many years later, we have Tar Minastir. Sauron is gaining power again, and the Numenorians hear about it. So meanwhile, the Numenorians are establishing their empire in Middle-earth. They establish strongholds after the big war in Eregion, which would make sense from a narrative standpoint. They found Pelargir, they found Umbar. These are actual port cities that are in the lore and that are important in the lore and even show up in Lord of the Rings. They could be doing that, and then they find out about Sauron. They're like, uh-oh, not this guy again. Tar Minastir goes over there, defeats him, takes him captive, and brings him back to Numenor, which leads to the other major branch of this entire thing, which is how Sauron's presence in Numenor, which is actually almost biblical. It's like Joseph and the Pharaoh in the Bible, where Joseph gets thrown in the pit by his own brothers, and then he becomes a slave to the Pharaoh. But because he's so wise and able to interpret dreams, he ends up becoming the Pharaoh's advisor, and later on saving his own father and brothers from getting killed by the Pharaoh, which has always been a very interesting story in the Bible, in the Old Testament. And that's what Sauron is. Sauron is like Joseph in that respect, where he's taken in as a prisoner back to Numenor, but he manages to become like the hand of the king, essentially, and begins to lead them down the path of corruption and the path of a death, pretty much like a death blood sacrifice cult, in which Elendil and his sons, which are part of the faithful crew, get ostracized. So there's this now there's like a real drama, not a drama about whether they should go to Middle Earth or not, like they're doing in this show, but a drama concerning what their real belief and their faith, and whether it's even right to sacrifice people, right? And him being the hand of the king and living forever, mind you, when we get to our Pharazôn, Tar Palantir shows up, which is the father of Miriel, and he repents that they have turned against their ways, which is a result of Sauron. And he repents, but then Pharazôn usurps the throne from his own cousin. Miriel marries her, and Sauron convinces him that if they want to live forever, right? Because the obsession with the Númenóreans as time passes on is the obsession that all people have, right? We all want to live forever for some dumb reason. So he's like, if you want to live forever, you need to literally go and fight the Valar in Valinor, because they have that power and they're keeping it from you. And that leads to the Valar then causing the sinking of Numenor. And that could be a whole season 2. And you're not going against the timeline. You're following the timeline. You're actually progressing with the story as it's supposed to. And mind you, notice how Sauron is still the major key and the major component. And then the last season, really, then after that, you could talk about everything that leads to the War of Alliance, the War of the Last Alliance of Elves and Men, which is significant only because by that point, Numenor has fallen. Elendil and his sons have formed and the survivors of Numenor have formed 2 kingdoms, one called Gondor, one called Arnor. So it's kind of like Numenor's no longer, the might of Numenor is lost, but these people join with what's left of the elves to fight Sauron once more. Sauron rises again. Now, mind you, it's an important thing to note that Sauron dies with the sinking of Numenor. So, and it's a fact. Remember, before that, he still had his full power, and he could make himself look beautiful. He could look however he wanted to look. He could look like an amazing, charming man, And he did put a lot of his power into the One Ring that he had forged. And he dies in the sinking. His physical body dies in the sinking of Numenor. And it is his spirit that escapes somehow, I guess. That's kind of metaphysical. His spirit escapes the flooding with the ring. But now he's a shadow. So after that sinking, he's forever a shadow. And he can't take on a form of beauty anymore. He can't look wonderful anymore. So he can't really fool anybody anymore by coming to them looking like, this wonderful looking guy. So he really needs the ring now because he's just a spirit. So without the ring, he has no power anymore. Nonetheless, he resurges as an enemy one more time. And at this point, he's powerful enough with the ring that it takes, like I was saying, the remainder of the Númenóreans in Arnor and Gondor to join with the elves and fight him. And then the fighting is so tragic. There's a siege in Barad-dûr. It lasts for a while. Gil-galad gets killed. Elendil gets killed. Anarion, which is Isildur's brother, which we haven't seen in the show yet, he gets killed. And Isildur survives. He's the only survivor. And Elrond and Galadriel, not that Galadriel was involved in the battle, but Elrond was definitely involved in that battle. And Isildur survives, and he manages to cut off the ring from Sauron's hands. And Elrond says, okay, we got the ring, now let's throw it in the volcano so that we can be done. And Isildur's like, oh no, my father and my brother died fighting for me to get this ring. I am keeping it as my treasure, my award, my reward for our suffering. And for some reason, Elrond's like, I guess. And immediately Isildur, on his way through trekking back home, I forget exactly, along the river Anduin, which is near to Mordor, by the way, loses the ring, and then Gollum gets the ring. And that's pretty much the end of the Second Age. And that's why Isildur is significant, really. That's really the only main reason he's significant, apart from the fact that he carries the legacy of his father. But pretty much he had sons, and his brother had sons by that time. And I believe that Elendil and Isildur founded the kingdom of Arnor in the north, and his brother Anarion and his Anarion's sons take over the kingship of this kingdom that they found in the south. And that's pretty much the material. So, I mean, I think there's enough there that could have been done well instead of doing this. So anyway, that's that for this season, for this episode. I don't know what they plan to do with 7 and 8. Like you saw, Galadriel died, right? Or not. Stay tuned. So yeah.